Once you know what I got
All
to
right,
do.
let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Carrie Lafine, and I work on marketing here at Family Matters. I'm just going to take a minute to say a few words about our agency before we get started today. We are a family-owned and operated in-home care agency. We have 3 locations throughout California, and we have more than 300 caregivers on staff. Our team does their very best to match our caregivers with our clients based on both the client's needs and personality. Our caregivers work in the client's home or facility where they reside, assisting them with daily activities ranging from personal care, meal prep, light housekeeping, transportation, rehabilitation routines, and they also provide companionship. Our caregivers also receive ongoing training in dementia and Alzheimer's care and are prepared to work with clients that are dealing with different levels of cognitive decline. If you want more information about our services, we will be following up via email after Tammy's presentation today. We will also be sending out a recording of today's webinar in the next few days. Also, last thing, if you have any questions during the presentation today, please go ahead and put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will be sure to have time for Tammy to go over them at the end. Okay, I will now turn things over to our presenter today, and I'll allow Tammy to introduce herself. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Tammy Anastasia, and I am a dementia consultant, educator, and the author of Essential Strategies for the Dementia Caregiver, Learning to Pace Yourself. And I also have a private practice, and I provide one-on-one dementia guidance, emotional support, and care strategies for family and professional caregivers. And I also facilitate several caregiver support groups in the Bay Area. So today I'm going to talk about dementia caregiver challenges and strategies, how to pace yourself. I'm going to begin by going over the progression of dementia. Dementia is a progressive, physiological, degenerative brain disease, and currently there is no cure. There are actually over 100 different kinds of dementia, and the type of dementia will often affect how it affects the person. So the disease, dementia itself, is more than just memory loss. The disease can affect memory, language, word finding becomes very difficult. Thinking may become irrational as this disease progresses. Their physical abilities are compromised as the disease progresses. They have more difficulty standing, sitting, and walking. We see a decline in personal hygiene as dementia progresses. And at some point, the bathing, the toileting, the dressing, brushing of the teeth become very, very challenging as they lose their ability to do those things. And they lose the ability to problem solve, in addition to reasoning. At some point, as this disease progresses, they lose the ability to think rationally, and they lose the ability to process information logically. And also they'll have difficulty following directions, and the executive functioning is also affected by dementia. Executive functioning involves organizing, scheduling, and planning. And with some people with dementia, you'll see personality changes, and you'll also see changes in their behavior. So because of how dementia affects the brain, it can cause the following things to occur. As I mentioned before, it can cause behavior changes and increase confusion. One of the things you'll notice very early on is they'll confuse the day and the time. It also causes difficulty with reading, writing, and communicating. And what's important to know about this is as the disease progresses, the person with dementia loses their ability to communicate clearly and directly what their needs are, which becomes extremely challenging to figure out as they lose this ability to communicate clearly. They also will fixate, ruminate, and or repeat things over and over and over again. And this is one of the things that depletes and exhausts the caregiver more than anything. When their loved one gets stuck in what I call a loop, they fixate, ruminate, and repeat things over and over. And what you want to keep in mind about that, though, is when they are repeating or fixating on something, there's usually a theme to it. They're either fixated or ruminating about something that's important to them, something that might be meaningful, something that might be concerning them, or something they're afraid of. So as frustrating as it is, you want to pay attention to what the themes are, because then we'll have a better understanding as to how to communicate with them, which I'll discuss as we go along. Also, the disease may cause that some people, they're not able to recognize familiar people, places, and things. And you'll often hear or see as this disease progresses, they'll say they want to go home. And they've lived in a home, the same home, for 40, 50, 60 years. And the home they're referencing is a different home. So this too is a symptom of dementia. And also they may not recognize family, yourself included, which can be incredibly painful emotionally. They also lose their ability to censor or filter what they say and do. So often they may say things that are incorrect, that are inappropriate, or may be embarrassing. And you need to know this also is a result of dementia. It is not something that they have control over. And often they're not even aware they're doing it. And they will also lose the ability to become self-starters. They lose the ability to motivate or initiate getting engaged in activities. And as this disease progresses, they become more and more dependent on you to bring those activities to them, to encourage and engage them in those activities. So apathy happens quite frequently with people with dementia. And the caregivers will often share with me, you know, they're lazy, especially bringing in groceries. Their loved one might stare at them as they're going back and forth from the car, bringing in groceries. And that truly is because the person with dementia doesn't have that lacks that initiation. They lack that motivation. Again, they're not doing it because they're lazy, but the brain alters that mechanism. And then they will also become accusatory, argumentative, and combative. And they will become very accusatory when they can't find things that they're looking for. And the problem with that is that they've hidden it, and they go to hide things, not to hide them, but to put them someplace safe so no one can steal them, so nobody can take them. So if they can't find the item, they will often accuse you and or someone else for stealing it or hiding it from them. They will become extremely argumentative with you if you try to correct them, if you try to rationalize with them, or you over-explain something. What you need to keep in mind with people with dementia is they truly believe what their mind tells them. So we have to find other ways to communicate on their level. And they will often get very combative. We see this a lot when it comes to personal hygiene. Changing them, toileting them, bathing, those three things become extremely challenging and difficult to deal with as this disease progresses. And you need to know they become combative because it's an automatic defense mechanism. They don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. They don't understand the process. Remember, they lose that ability to process information. So we have to break things down in a way that simplify things for them, or we have to change our ways of approaching them so that they understand better what we're doing, so that that defense mechanism doesn't kick in. And we all have a defense mechanism. We all have an automatic defense mechanism that's going to kick in when we feel threatened. You're not threatening them, but their perception is that something's being done to me that I don't like. Also, They will withdraw from family and friends. And one of the most common things I hear in my private practice and in my support groups is how much the caregiver feels isolated and feels alone in this relationship as they manage taking care of the loved one with dementia. And they also will confuse the past with the present. So I really need everybody to hear this. If your loved one has any trauma, any physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse in their past, if they have any rejection issues, trust issues, or abandonment issues, there is a very high likelihood they're going to relive those experiences as though they're occurring in the present day. So this is really important to remember, because if we know that, then we'll also know how to better comfort them and reassure them that they are safe. But the sad story is that this is a progressive disease, and at some point they will need 24-hour care. So as the disease progresses, your loved one is going to become more and more dependent on you for the following things. These become the primary needs of a person with dementia. They're going to become more and more dependent on you for reassurance and support. They're going to become more and more dependent on you to make them feel safe and secure. As a matter of fact, some people with dementia will follow you around as though they're joined at the hip with you. That's called shadowing, because you are their security blanket. And therefore, there's this intense need to feel safe and secure because their world is changing. What was once familiar is no longer familiar. They will also become very dependent on you for physical comfort and care, and they're going to become dependent on you to feel heard and understood. Validation is one of the most important techniques, one of the most important strategies we can implement with people with dementia, and I'll go into more detail on how to do that. And then they're going to be dependent on you for the stimulation, the cognitive stimulation, the physical stimulation, and the social stimulation. So we have to bring activities to them as they lose their ability to self-start, motivation, and initiate. And they're also going to become very dependent on you to give them a sense of purpose and value. Because somebody has dementia, they still need to have that sense of purpose and value. So I feel having a sense of purpose and value is something that remains with us all the way till end of life. We just have to modify how we give them that sense of purpose and how we give them that sense of value. So that is super, super important to know, that at all times we have to give them a sense of purpose and value. So as this disease progresses and they become more and more dependent on you, the caregiver challenges are the following. Taking care of yourself becomes much more difficult as your responsibilities and the demands increase. And then also figuring out how to adapt and change your approach to meet your loved one's needs becomes very challenging. And hopefully I'll be able to give you some tips on how to do that. Also, dealing with difficult and challenging behaviors is very frustrating, very draining, and can cause a lot of angst between you and your loved one. The ultimate goal, though, the ultimate goal is to survive this journey without it being at the expense of your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And two of the best ways to do that is to conserve your energy and to pace yourself. So PACE is an acronym that I came up with to help caregivers be able to make this journey as compassionate, as loving, as kind and supportive as possible. So I'm going to go through what PACE means and share with you what the definition is of each of the letters. P stands for give yourself permission for trial and error. There is no perfect roadmap and there is no perfect caregiver. Sometimes figuring out what is best to do is by figuring out what doesn't work. And mistakes are opportunities to learn from. So you want to be very, very, very patient with yourself and give yourself permission to learn. I think of the dementia process as learning by doing. Unfortunately, that happens. That's the way we learn. That's the way we figure things out. So please give yourself permission to trial and error. So what goes hand in hand with that is, again, patience. So in my book, I teach you a lot of how to develop that patience. And one of the best things you can do is to try to not take what your loved one says and does personally. Much, much, much easier said than done. But when you can detach and realize everything your loved one does, everything that you're going through is because of dementia, it will not wear on you in the same way as if you took it personally. So I have this dementia mantra, and it goes as follows. The disease is causing my loved one to behave this way. And every time you start to take what your loved one says and does personally, I want you to say to yourself, the disease is causing my loved one to behave this way. So I think everybody's mic's off right now. I would like to, on 3, have everybody say this out loud. So on 1, 2, and 3. The disease is causing my loved one to behave this way. Let's do it one more time. On 3, 1, 2, and 3. The disease is causing my loved one to behave this way. And at some point, you're going to make this shift, this emotional shift. And now you will conserve more energy. You'll be able to respond more and reflective thinking rather than react. We can be so reactionary. So I don't expect you to be perfect. I don't want you to beat yourself up. I just want you to practice, practice, practice saying this mantra to yourself every time you start to take what your loved one says and does personally, so that you can detach, and then we can find other ways to communicate and interact with your loved one. The A stands for acknowledge their reality. Here's the reality of dementia. They're going to have an altered version of reality. They're going to live in an entirely different world. Their perceptions are going to change, their thinking's going to change, and they're going to say and do things that don't make sense, that may be offensive, that are incorrect. And we have to figure out what I call in my book, how to meet them where they are. So one of the best ways to do that is we need to validate their feelings, their thoughts, their frustrations, concerns, and fears. And validating doesn't mean that they're right or you're wrong. It's a way of neutralizing and communicating to your loved one that you hear what they're saying. You hear their concerns, you hear their frustrations. This is critically important when you communicate with somebody with dementia. And I have to be honest, this is something we all want, brain disease or no brain disease. Innately, we all want to feel heard and understood. We all want to feel validated. So with somebody with dementia, that's even more important. And then step 2 is we also now have to empathize and provide a comforting and reassuring response. So the way to know how to do that is when you paraphrase, repeat back to them what you hear them saying, then we have to provide a comforting and reassuring response. Often, like I said, there's themes to what they're asking. There's themes to what they're saying. There's themes to what they're concerned about. So when we know what those things are, we can provide them with a comforting and reassuring response. And step 3 is once we do the validating, providing a comforting response, we immediately want to try to redirect them and distract them and get them focused or engaged in a topic or an activity they enjoy. So one of the things I highly recommend is you write down about 6 to 8 to 10 things that you know your loved one enjoys and makes them happy. And some really great distractions are food. When in doubt, feed them. Food, there's also photo albums, music, reminiscing are wonderful ways of distracting. And like I said earlier, they're going to fixate and ruminate or repeat things that are important to them or are memorable. Those are the things that you're going to end up using often as ways of distracting them. So what you need to know about this approach is that it has to happen in quick succession. We have to validate first, we have to empathize, and then we need to distract. So let me give you an example. They'll often say they want to go home. So what I'm going to say to that is, thank you for, thank you for letting me know you want to go home. What do you love most about home? And they're going to describe it to you. And the comforting and reassuring response is, I love that too about that house. So, we can't go right now, but I know it's important for you to go. So before we go, let's have some ice cream. In other words, now I'm going to try to distract. Another thing, they'll often ask to see a deceased person. So you want to say, I know you'd like to go see Sally. Right now, we need to have lunch first. And I love Sally is such a funny person. She's such a great person, isn't she? So let's think about going to see her after we have such and such, or after we do such and such. So you want to validate, empathize, and then distract. The C stands for compassionate care, and this works both ways. Compassionate care for your loved one, as well as provide compassionate care for yourself. I have a big section on this in my book on how to provide that compassionate care for yourself, how to deal with the wealth of emotion that you go through, the caregiver guilt, the resentment, the frustration, the loss, and the sadness. And also I provide compassionate ways to communicate with your loved one. So for today, I'm going to go through some ways to provide compassionate communication with your loved one. Pay attention, be very mindful of your body language, tone of voice, and facial expressions. As people with dementia lose their ability to process information, what happens is they start becoming very in tune and sensitive to their environment around them. It's the way they learn to gauge how things are going and what's happening. So if you are going to rush them, you're going to get them very frustrated, very angry. And so you want to be very mindful of your body language, your tone of voice, and facial expressions. As a matter of fact, the Alzheimer's Association says 55% of communicating with somebody with dementia is in our body language, 38% is our tone of voice, and 7% is our words. So pay attention to what your body language is communicating. Now, that said, I am going to really encourage you to start studying their body language. Start paying attention to their tone of voice and their facial expressions. And the reason I'm encouraging you to do that is as they lose the ability to communicate directly what their needs are, you're going to want to rely on what is their body language communicating. If they're squinting, if they're frowning, if their eyes are doing a certain thing, their posture is a certain way. You want to start learning what their body language is communicating now to make it easier on you to try to figure out what those needs are. You also want to shift your focus from saying it's time for you to take your medication, it's time for you to put your pajamas on, and instead you want to replace the word you with we and us. It's time for us to take our medication. It's time for us to put our pajamas on. It's time for us to go to bed. There's it's a subtle shift, but it has a major influence. It often will increase cooperation because when they hear you, They feel that you're pointing your finger at them, you're being punitive. And when it's a we and us, it's something we're doing together. I'm included. It gives me a sense of belonging. It gives me a sense of connection, something we're doing together rather than singling me out. You also want to keep your questions and answers short and simple. The shorter, the simpler, the better. And try to avoid going into lengthy explanations. You will lose them. So think short and simple. And you also want to simplify the decision-making process for yourself as well as for your loved one. So instead of asking open-ended questions like, what would you like for dinner? You want to say, do you want a hamburger or tuna for dinner? Do you want eggs or cereal for breakfast? Do you want to wear the blue or do you want to wear the green shirt? Give them two choices. And the nice thing about two choices, it still gives them a sense of independence. It allows them to participate in the decision-making process while they still can. We just have to simplify the decision-making process for them. And believe me, this will save and conserve your energy immensely. The other thing, which is really hard to do, and I just will encourage you to practice, is try to avoid asking why and if they remember. Assume they don't know why and assume they're not going to remember. Now, every once in a while, it's a fluke that they'll remember or they'll be able to tell you why, but it's a fluke. It's not going to be the standard. We really don't want to spend a lot of time and energy testing their memory and trying to get them to see what we want to see. They have a male functioning brain. Their brain cells are deteriorating. So by asking them why and if they remember can be perceived as being cruel. And we're not being cruel. It's really hard to not ask why and if they remember. It's just something we say often. And I'm just going to encourage you to practice. And then try to avoid arguing, explaining, rationalizing, or correcting them. Remember what I said earlier, they believe what their mind tells them. And instead, what you want to do is you want to replace arguing, explaining, correcting, and rationalizing with the three-step process I just went over. Validate, empathize, and distract. And I'm going to say one more thing about empathizing. One of the best things you could do in terms of empathizing is imagine you were going through what they're going through. Imagine that you were thinking what they were thinking. Imagine you were thinking or feeling what they were feeling. Imagine you were concerned. What responses would you want them to communicate back to you that would be reassuring, that would make you feel safe and secure? So that's another way of knowing and jumping into their world is imagine if you felt the way they felt, if you thought the way they thought, what would you want to be told? And communicate a reassuring, comforting response. And then at some point, they lose the ability to process information logically. They lose that ability. And now verbal cues may not be enough. And we have to do verbal and visual cues. Often when it comes to a toileting situation, we might have a picture of someone sitting on a toilet seat over the toilet in the bathroom. We might have restroom put on the bathroom door. So visual and verbal cues are very effective, especially as this disease progresses. And the other thing you want to keep in mind is you want to start breaking down in very short increment steps, like give them a clue one step at a time. If you think about bathing, let's say taking a shower, think about the numerous steps that are involved to do that process. And as this disease deteriorates, we have to provide a simpler, more gentle way of communicating what needs to be done. So you want to break it down into very, very manageable, slow steps. So it's one step at a time. Then you also want to speak slower, which I was just practicing doing. Give them more time to process the information. Give them more time to hear what you're saying. And that will allow you to speak more clearly as well. And then you always, always, always want to be at their eye level, make eye contact with them. So if they're sitting in a chair, you want to sit in a chair and make eye contact with them. If they're standing, you want to stand and make eye contact with them. If they are somewhere and their back is to you and you're trying to communicate to them, it's going to be very difficult for them to understand and hear what you're saying. And likewise, you don't want to have your back to them either. So make eye contact, speak slower, break things down into small baby incremental steps. So it makes it easier for them to process the information. And when in doubt, if you think you're going to lose your temper, you think you're just going to be impatient, when in doubt, walk away. There is no harm in walking away. And if you do lose your patience, if you do lose your temper, apologize, walk away, collect yourself, and then come back and start over. The one nice thing, unfortunately, about dementia is they do have short-term memory loss, but you walk away feeling so horrible about yourself. And I just want you to walk away, recollect, go back, forgive yourself, and we'll try again. The E in the PACE stands for empower yourself. This is huge in terms of empowering yourself by educating yourself more, not only about the disease, but you want to educate yourself more and identify what we call triggers. Your loved one's going to have triggers and you have your own triggers. Remember, you have a relationship with the person you're taking care of pre-dementia. And if there are any underlying issues or anything that bothered you about your loved one pre-dementia, dementia is going to elevate that. So if you know what your triggers are, we can equip you and what I call prepare for what is inevitable. Prepare for when those triggers occur so you know how to respond. And we come up with 3 or 4 different ways to respond when your triggers or your buttons get pushed. Now, that being said, for as unpredictable as dementia can be, there are times that things cause them to react a certain way. There may be patterns to why they do what they do. For example, sundown syndrome. This is something that occurs 3, 4 o'clock late afternoon. And if we see a pattern that 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they're getting agitated, this clues us in, they may be experiencing sundown syndrome. And there's things we can do to try to avoid those issues reoccurring, whether it's medication, getting them involved in an activity, but you want to try to identify any causes, triggers, or patterns. So let me explain and give you an example of where I had a client. There's no way we would have figured this out, but I had a client, and every time he went to see his father, most of the time, father was fantastic. But on occasion, the father would just flip out. Get the H out of my house. Who do you think you are? You're not welcome here. So I said to my client, listen, let's start documenting when this happens. And it happened every time he wore something red. And there's no way we would have figured that out until we went exploring to see if there's any patterns, causes, or triggers. So there is a lot of value that if you can identify any causes or triggers, then we can either circumvent them, prevent them, or at least decrease the frequency and the intensity in which they occur. The second thing to do to empower yourself is our intentions are good. This journey is a long journey. This journey can be very intense, and it can be very challenging, and it can be very meaningful and loving. but I don't want it to be at the expense of your physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And you cannot do this journey alone. You may start off doing this journey alone, but at some point, the dementia demands more care. It's not that you can't provide more care, it's that dementia demands more care than one person can provide. So the sooner you can identify and get support for yourself, the better. So I have this 3-step: create a support network. So take a sheet of paper, put a line down the middle. In the left column, write down what you need help with, what you don't like to do, or what you don't want to do. The right-hand column, put a list of resources. And I want you to think of family and friends. I want you to reach out to community resources, faith-based resources, professional resources. And in the left-hand column, what you need help with, you're going to put a list. Let's say, make dinner, house cleaning, companion care, run errands. And I want you in that right-hand column to fill the item in with a name and a resource. And the name, the email, the phone number, the contact information. And your goal is to have a resource for every task or item you have listed in the left-hand column. And that list is going to change as your loved one's needs change. So you're constantly going to be modifying it. But the sooner you can establish and create the support network, the better you're going to hold up. And you need that support. You can join a support group. You could, again, put this list together, but find people, join groups where you get a chance to be able to talk about what you're going through and how hard this is on you. Because reality is, you are just as important as the person you're taking care of. So, and step 3 is ask for help, utilize those resources. I can't tell you how many of us want to help you, but we don't know how to help you unless you tell us specifically what it is you need. Reach out to us. We do want to help. And when you do reach out to people, be specific. I want 6 cans of StarKist tuna in water, not just 6 cans of tuna. Or I need someone to come and take my loved one out for lunch between 12 and 2 on such and such date so that I can go to a doctor's appointment. Be very, very, very specific. And also, when you create the support network, capitalize on people's strengths. Capitalize on the things they like to do. So I'll use myself as an example. You would not want me to bring you a meal. I don't cook, and I don't know if you would survive it if I did. So, but I love people, I love companion care, and I love running errands. So you would want to utilize me in a way that I enjoy doing the things that I do. So think about people's strengths, and you can have more than one person to each of the tasks that you list in that left column. As a matter of fact, the more the better, because then you can rotate them and we have a lot more people you can choose from. So write down what you need help with. It is okay to say, I don't want to do A, B, C, and D. And it is okay to say, I do not like doing A, B, C, D, and E. It is okay. Then let's get the resources in there to help you deal with those things. And then number 3 is plan ahead. So we know this journey is going to end at some point. I can't tell you how fast. I can't tell you, when and what's going to happen. So there's 3 things that are very important to do. One is to establish what I call an emergency plan. And the main thing I'm going to say about the emergency plan right now is, what do you have in place if something were to happen to you and your loved one has dementia and they may not be able to call 911? What if something happens to you and you're not alert? You can't call 911. You can't call for help. You have to put an emergency plan in place. So if something happened to you, somehow the medical authorities would be notified on your behalf. So if you are taking care of a loved one and it's just the two of you at home and the loved one has dementia, we have to come up with a backup plan that if you were to go unconscious, how are medical authorities going to be able to act on your behalf? So think about signing up for a life alert, medical alert. If we have to, sometimes we put cameras in the house, not because we're spying, but to make sure that you're safe and you're doing okay. Sometimes family implement a phone call at certain times. And if you don't call back within, a 15-minute window, then they will call a neighbor or somebody is going to come and check on your behalf. We can't depend on the person with dementia to know what to do. Then as this disease progresses, at some point, you're going to need more help. And it will often involve bringing in home care. So what I like to have my clients do is to start getting acquainted with home care agencies now. Start getting to know them, get a contact name, talk with them, understand what their services are. So if a crisis occurs and or when that time comes, you have a relationship established with them already, and they can implement service right away rather than building up this rapport and going through the process. When a crisis occurs, the last thing you want to do is be floundering around. We want to have things as lined up as possible. So I encourage a lot of people just to get acquainted with the home care agencies that are out there, find out about their services, how they operate, and see who's going to be the best fit. So in my book, I go into detail about how to develop that emergency plan, and then I provide you with questions to ask home care agencies and what the answer should be. And then the other thing is go and look into care communities. At some point, it is really, really hard to afford 24-hour home care. So we may have to put them in a care community. Start getting acquainted now with those care communities. Go look at several of them. Get to know what they call the community resource person, marketing person. Find one or two of your first choices, places that you like, that you think would be a good fit for your loved one. Get on the waiting list now. You can say, I'm not ready. They'll just bring you back down to the waiting list. But this is where you want to try to line up your ducks as much as possible. So again, in my book, I provide you with questions to ask home care agencies. I provide the questions to ask these care communities what the answer should be. And, we're not going to always be prepared for a crisis, but we're going to do the best we can, because things do happen. So line up your ducks to the best of your ability now, have a few resources already in mind, and boom, the minute we need to start implementing them, we have the contacts, we have the place figured out, we have the home care agency that we want to work with. So these are some examples of what the PACE strategies are. I have a ton more of examples in my book, but I wanted to give you a sense of how you can navigate and make this journey as loving, compassionate, and kind as possible. So before I conclude, there is one more thing I'd like for all of us to do. And I would like for all of us out loud to read this quote by Wayne Dyer together. And so on 3, I would like for you to read it out loud with me. So 1, 2, and 3. Peace is the result of retraining your mind to process life as it is rather than as you think it should. Your loved ones, and on behalf of myself, I would like to thank all of you for the care, the love, and support you provide day in and day out. I want to thank you all again for attending my webinar today. And before we end this webinar, I do want to give people an opportunity to ask questions. If you have some suggestions you want to add, any comments, I want to allow this time now to be about you and do the best I can to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, Tammy, I will start with some questions that we have in the chat.
Okay.
A couple people are mentioning that you said you have a San Francisco area based support group, and they're wondering if you have any resources or know of anything similar for the Sacramento or San Diego areas.
I don't, but I will say this, the Alzheimer's Association, go to their website, alz.org. And let me, before I say that, know that that all of my support groups right now are virtual. So I have people join my support groups that are in different states because it's virtual. So out here, we haven't started anything back in person. So that's a way if you wanted to join any of my support groups. But you can go to alz.org, Alzheimer's Association, and go to support groups, put in your zip code, and there will be a list of groups that are in that area. So that's another way of finding a list. And then also you can go to Facebook. There's a lot of support groups, I understand, that are on Facebook. So that's another avenue you could explore as well.
Is Tammy, when we send out the, a couple of people are asking also, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar within the next few days. It'll arrive via email. In the email with the link to this recording, is there more information or a link that you can provide like for your support group information, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. You can go to my website, www.tammyanastasia.com, TAMIANASTASIA.com. And if you go to services, you will see there's a drop-down menu, and it'll say counseling, and then it also says support groups. And then there is also a calendar, and you could always sign up there.
Okay, and I can go ahead and put a link for that in the email too, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. And then let's see. People are wondering where they can purchase your book.
Oh, you can get my book on Amazon. And you could also go through my website if you wanted to order it. If you're on my website and you want to order it, you can order it through there as well.
Let's see. Somebody is concerned about paying for care. They have a higher income than can qualify for Medi-Cal or other assistance, but not quite enough to cover the expenses. And they're wondering what people can do. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, so the Alzheimer's Association has a grant that you may want to apply for. And there's also Hilarity for Charity that the Home Instead Care, I coordinate that. So Hilarity for Charity, I believe that's Seth Rogen, the actor, and his wife. And then you could go to the Alzheimer's Association. And if you wouldn't mind, if you send me a private email, I will actually I'll give my colleague her name and number so that you could contact her and see if she can help you in any way. So email me directly at tammy@tammyanastasia.com. Just say that you were on this webinar. I'm the one that was talking about ABC, and you said that you could refer me to somebody who might be able to help me with this, and I'll know who to send it to.
Okay, we have some more questions in the Q&A portion. Somebody is wondering what they can do when our levels of compassion conflict with self-care.
That's a tough one. So very much what you could start doing is take what I call a daily 10-minute timeout for yourself. and you want to make yourself a priority. 10 minutes is enough to take a break from the demands and the challenges of the day. So in my book, I have a lot of suggestions on what can you do in 10 minutes. But my favorite is, so I advise people to do this a lot. And one of my clients is a Giants fan, and turned her baseball cap upside down, and we came up with 10 different things that she could do in 10 minutes, daily 10-minute timeout. And now she draws from the hat, and whatever that is what she does once a day. And now it's grown to like 20, 30 different things to do. But what you have to do is at some point make a conscious effort to make yourself a priority, and take at the minimum, take a 10-minute daily timeout to do something fun, nurturing, or comforting for yourself. It is a very fine line between taking care of somebody and taking care of yourself. And dementia is so demanding. And we have to build in that time for you. And I go in great length in the book also on many other ways to be compassionate with yourself.
Somebody is asking if you have any suggestions for oral care. My spouse will not allow me to use a toothbrush, and mouthwash does not work.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Oral care there, what I would do truly is go online and check out some of TEPA Snow's, TEEPA, T as in Tammy, EE, elephant, elephant, P as in Paul, A, Snow, SNOW. And she has some videos on ways to deal with oral care. And a lot of the oral care is going to come down to, what I don't know is how far this disease has progressed. And so sometimes oral care will involve teamwork, like you will have to demonstrate how to do it. We've got to break it down into steps. We can't force them. Teepa Snow has this hand over hand and can, maybe get them to cooperate. But that is one of the biggest challenges. And we have to step outside of the box. Imagine you were your loved one and just refuse. Are there any ways of doing this differently and approaching it differently where we might increase cooperation? It's not going to be, this is what you need to do and how to do it. We have to think outside of the box based on who your loved one is, and see if we can find creative ways to break that process down so it's very, 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 very slow and minor.
Similarly, somebody is asking about somebody who does not want to bathe or wash.
Yeah.
And also somebody who gets up frequently during the night to use the restroom.
Yes, yes. So in my book, there's 11 of the most challenging behaviors: bathing, toileting. There's a list of 11 where I talk about implementing the 4 Ds of dementia care. And the toileting at night is, here you want to cut off any fluids after a certain hour at night. Now, it's a catch-22 because we don't want them to become hydrated, but we want to cut it off early enough. The other thing that I don't know is, has this been a problem pre-dementia? Have they always had this habit of getting up and going to the bathroom at least once or twice at night? The other thing you want to look into, there's actually one of the dementia drugs, I believe it's Aricept, I'm not sure which one, is a stimulant. And we don't want to have them take that at night. So I would also look at the medications that your loved one is taking at night, and let's make sure it's not a stimulant. Bathing, challenging, hugely challenging. But here again, I'm going to go ahead and advise you to look at Teepa Snow videos, read my section on bathing, type in bathing, type in oral care on the internet, and you're going to see a lot of different blogs, and you'll see other advice on how to deal with that.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions? I think I got them all. Okay, I think that is it then. Thank you so much, Tammy.
Thank you for having me, and I wish you all the very, very, very best. And Again, thank you for everything that you do. Thank you, Carrie and Family Matters, for supporting the families, and for all of the caregivers out there. Thank you for everything you do. And remember, you are just as important as the person you're taking care of. Thank you, everybody.